What if almost everything you've been told about becoming smarter is backwards? From a moment we're old enough to sit in a classroom, we're taught that intelligence is something you earn by spending years memorizing information. Get good grades, read the textbook, pass the test, repeat, and eventually, you're supposed to become one of the smart people. But then something strange happens. Some students graduate at the top of their class and struggle to solve simple real-world problems. Others barely finish school, yet somehow build billion-dollar companies, master new skills in months, and seem to absorb information faster than everyone around them. So what separates them? Is it genetics? A higher IQ? Pure luck? Or have we simply misunderstood what intelligence actually is? Over the last few decades, neuroscientists have uncovered something remarkable about the human brain. Intelligence isn't nearly as fixed as we once believed. Your brain is constantly rebuilding itself, strengthening some connections while deleting others, adapting every single day based on how you use it. That means becoming smarter isn't about cramming more information into your head. It's about teaching your brain what deserves to stay. And once you understand how that process works, learning almost anything becomes dramatically easier. But before we get into the techniques that actually rewire your brain, we need to destroy one of the biggest myths about intelligence. A myth that has convinced millions of people they're simply not smart enough. Because that's where everything begins. Imagine two children sitting in the same classroom. One solves math problems almost instantly. The other struggles just to keep up. Teachers praise the first child for being naturally gifted, while the second slowly begins believing they're simply not smart. Years pass. One grows more confident. The other stops trying, not because they couldn't improve, but because they believe they couldn't. This idea, that intelligence is something you're born with, is one of the most damaging beliefs a person can have. For decades, people treated IQ as if it were a permanent score that determined your future. If you were born with a high IQ, success was almost guaranteed. If your score was average, there wasn't much you could do about it. It sounds convincing. After all, we've all met people who seem naturally brilliant. The friend who barely studies but aces every exam. The coworker who understands complicated ideas after hearing them once. The kid who somehow learns 3 languages before graduating high school. It's easy to assume their brains are simply built differently. But modern neuroscience paints a much more interesting picture. Your brain is not a block of concrete. It's more like a forest. Every thought you repeat creates a path. The more often you travel that path, the wider and easier it becomes. Meanwhile, the paths you stop using slowly disappear beneath the trees. Scientists call this neuroplasticity. It's your brain's incredible ability to reorganize itself throughout your entire life. Every skill you've ever learned, from riding a bike to typing without looking at the keyboard, physically change your brain. Musicians develop stronger connections between regions responsible for hearing and movement. Taxi drivers who spend years memorizing thousands of streets often develop larger areas involved in spatial navigation. Professional chess players don't just know more about chess. Their brains literally recognize board patterns differently than beginners. The fascinating part is that none of these people were born with those specific brain connections. They built them, one repetition at a time. That doesn't mean genetics don't matter. They do. Some people begin the race a little ahead. Others start farther back. But starting position isn't the same thing as finishing position. History is filled with people who weren't considered exceptional early in life. Albert Einstein reportedly struggled with traditional schooling. Thomas Edison was told he wasn't suited for learning. Many successful entrepreneurs were average students. Not because school was useless, but because intelligence isn't measured by how much information you can temporarily memorize. It's measured by how effectively you can understand, connect, and apply ideas. That's a completely different skill. And here's where things become even more interesting. If your brain constantly changes based on what you do, then what happens when you spend years consuming information without ever using it? The answer explains why so many people feel like they learn constantly, yet remember almost nothing. And once you understand this hidden process, you'll never look at learning the same way again. Here's a question. Can you remember what you watched on YouTube 3 weeks ago? Probably not. What about the 10th productivity video you watched last month? Or the documentary you thought completely changed your perspective? Most people can't. Not because they weren't paying attention, but because their brains quietly decided those memories weren't worth keeping. That sounds harsh, but forgetting isn't a flaw. It's actually one of the smartest things your brain does. Think about everything you experience in a single day. Thousands of words, hundreds of faces, conversations, notifications, advertisements, songs, videos, random thoughts. If your brain stored every tiny detail forever, you'd be overwhelmed almost instantly. Instead, it constantly asks one simple question. Will I need this again? If the answer appears to be no, delete it. This process is happening every single day without you noticing. It's why you can remember your childhood phone number, but forget someone's name only minutes after meeting them. It's why you still remember embarrassing moments from years ago, yet can't remember what you ate last Tuesday. Your brain doesn't prioritize information. It prioritizes usefulness. And this is exactly where most people unknowingly sabotage themselves. Imagine spending 3 hours watching videos about investing. You feel productive. You're learning. You're taking notes. You finish feeling smarter than when you started. Then a week later, someone asks you to explain compound interest. Suddenly, your mind goes blank. What happened? The information never became important enough for your brain to keep. Watching created familiarity, not mastery. This illusion is incredibly common. Psychologists sometimes refer to it as the illusion of competence. Simply recognizing information makes us believe we've learned it. But recognition isn't understanding. It's the difference between recognizing a song when it plays and being able to perform it yourself. One requires exposure. The other requires reconstruction. That's why students often reread the same chapter 5 times. Each time it feels more familiar. Confidence increases. Then the exam arrives. Nothing comes to mind, because reading isn't the same as retrieving. Your brain doesn't strengthen memories when information enters. It strengthens them when information comes back out. That single difference changes everything. It explains why someone who studies for 2 focused hours can outperform another person who spends 10 hours highlighting pages. It explains why passive learning feels comfortable but rarely lasts. And it reveals the first real secret of becoming smarter. Your brain remembers what it has to work for, which leads us to a learning technique so effective that it's used by top medical students, world-class performers, and memory champions alike. Ironically, almost nobody outside those circles ever uses it. Into Part 1. Part 2. The learning trick that rewires your brain. Section 3. The secret nobody uses. If there were a learning technique that could cut your study time, dramatically improve your memory, and permanently change how your brain stores information, you'd expect schools to teach it from day one. Most don't. Instead, millions of students still rely on the same routine they've used for years. Read a chapter. Highlight a few sentences. Read it again. Maybe watch a YouTube video explaining the same topic from a slightly different angle. Repeat until it feels familiar. The problem is that feeling familiar isn't the same thing as actually knowing something. Imagine someone handed you a map of New York City. You study every street, every avenue, every landmark. You spend hours staring at it until you could almost picture the city with your eyes closed. Now imagine someone drops you in the middle of Manhattan without the map. Would you know where to go? Probably not, because looking at information isn't the same as using it. Your brain was never designed to reward passive observation. It rewards effort. This is where one of the most powerful discoveries in cognitive science completely changes the game. It's called retrieval practice. The idea is surprisingly simple. Instead of putting information into your brain over and over again, force your brain to pull it back out. At first, it feels much harder. That's exactly why it works. Think about lifting weights. If someone else lifted the dumbbell for you every day, your muscles wouldn't grow. Your brain works the same way. Every time you struggle to remember something, neurons fire, reconnect, and strengthen the pathway leading to that memory. It's almost like your brain says, "Oh, you needed this again? I should make it easier to find next time." That's why the smartest students often look less productive than everyone else. While everyone around them is quietly highlighting textbooks with 5 different colors, they're closing the book and asking themselves questions. What was the main idea? Could I explain this to someone else? What would happen if this principle didn't exist? They aren't reading more. They're thinking more. And that's the difference. One medical student once described studying as making the exam happen every day. Instead of waiting until test day to discover what they didn't know, they challenged themselves constantly. Every mistake became a lesson instead of a surprise. It sounds uncomfortable. That's because it is. And discomfort is often a sign that real learning is happening. Psychologists sometimes call this desirable difficulty. When learning requires genuine effort, the memory becomes stronger. Easy learning often disappears just as easily as arrived. This is also why teaching someone else is so incredibly effective. Have you ever tried explaining something you thought you understood, only to realize halfway through that you couldn't answer the simplest question? It's a humbling experience, but it's also one of the fastest ways to identify gaps in your knowledge. Physicist Richard Feynman became famous for using this exact approach. Whenever he wanted to master a subject, he challenged himself to explain it using language simple enough for almost anyone to understand. No complicated vocabulary, no hiding behind technical jargon. If he couldn't simplify it, he knew he didn't understand it well enough. Think about that for a moment. The goal wasn't to sound intelligent. The goal was to remove every illusion of understanding. Most people do the opposite. They collect complicated words because they make them feel smarter. But genuine intelligence isn't measured by how complex your explanations are. It's measured by how simple you can make something that once seemed impossible. This single habit separates experts from amateurs. Experts don't memorize definitions. They build understanding. And once understanding exists, remembering becomes much easier. But here's the surprising part. Even perfect memory isn't enough. You could memorize every fact in an encyclopedia and still struggle to solve problems that you've never seen before. Because intelligence isn't just about remembering information. It's about connecting information. And that's where almost everyone gets stuck. Imagine walking into the world's largest library. Every book ever written sits on endless shelves stretching farther than you can see. Now, imagine you somehow memorized every single page, every date, every formula, every historical event, every scientific discovery. Would that automatically make you a genius? Surprisingly, no, because information by itself has very little value. The internet proved that. Today, almost every fact in human history can be found in seconds. If intelligence were simply about knowing facts, search engines would be the smartest things on earth. But they aren't, because knowledge isn't the same thing as understanding. The smartest thinkers rarely impress people because they know more. They impress people because they see connections that everyone else misses. Take a simple apple. A chef sees ingredients. A painter sees color. A physicist sees gravity. A business owner sees supply chains. A nutritionist sees vitamins. Same object, completely different ways of thinking. The difference isn't intelligence. It's mental models. Mental models are frameworks your brain uses to understand the world. They're shortcuts built from experience that help you predict outcomes, solve problems, and make better decisions. Every time you learn something deeply enough to connect it with another idea, you build another model. Eventually, these models begin working together. Instead of seeing isolated facts, you start seeing systems. That's exactly how inventors make breakthroughs, how investors recognize opportunities, how great chess players predict moves before they're played, and how experienced doctors sometimes recognize an illness after noticing just a few subtle clues. They aren't performing magic. They're recognizing patterns. Think of your brain like a giant puzzle. Every new piece of knowledge means very little on its own. But every time you connect one piece to another, the picture becomes clearer. Most people collect puzzle pieces. Smart people build the picture. This is also why reading random articles all day rarely transforms your thinking. Without connections, information floats around your mind like scattered puzzle pieces sitting in different boxes. Useful? Sometimes. Powerful? Not really. Real intelligence emerges when ideas begin interacting with each other. History explains economics. Economics explains politics. Politics influences technology. Technology changes psychology. Psychology shapes business. Suddenly, one idea unlocks 5 others. That's why some conversations with incredibly intelligent people feel almost magical. They jump effortlessly between subjects because, inside their minds, those subjects were never separate to begin with. Everything connects. The fascinating part is that anyone can begin building those connections. You don't need a genius-level IQ. You need curiosity. You need exposure to different fields. And most importantly, you need to stop reading just to finish books. Instead, read to change the way you think.